This is Unhurried, and I'm your host, Doug Kyle. You know, life can feel like a race, rushing to the next thing, never time to reflect. But there is incredible value in slowing down with God to take in His perspective, His presence, His pace. What does it really mean to love others as we love ourselves? This is episode 10, season 2 of Unhurried. I'm your host, Doug Kyle, featuring now a regular staple, Ryan Viramontes.
Yep.
He's here with us every week now. Welcome to both our listeners as well as our viewers who are following along. For those of you that are watching, Ryan is the one in the ball cap. So if you're trying to figure out who's who, that's him. You probably can tell by who's talking too.
Right.
So you're wearing a ball. I think you've worn a ball cap every episode.
Right, and I have, and it's not ideal, right? I like my hair, and I like to do my hair, but
I like my hair. Right quote.
I'm just saying, I do. I enjoy doing my hair and getting my hair cut and stuff, and but the kids, having to get them out the door in the morning, it's like it's impossible for me, and I don't know how early I have to wake up because I keep on going. Okay, I just need an extra 20 minutes. I need an extra, and I still am running around like a madman.
With young kids, that's always going to be the case.
I'm like, where are your shoes?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you don't know where your water bottle is? You know, it's like, I'm like, oh my gosh, so there's never enough time.
I like the vibe though. I like the ball cap for the podcast. It kind of fits the mood.
Yeah, one of these days I'll wake up at 5 and I'll do my hair and then get the kids out the door.
All right. Well, you'll know if he's not wearing a ball cap. It was especially easy morning for Ryan.
Yeah.
Also sporting a youth group camp sweatshirt.
Yeah, I got the youth group camp hoodie. Got the camp merch. So I didn't go to the camp this year, but we went up to visit one day.
You went up to visit,
yeah, which was really fun.
You earned your sweatshirt for sure.
Yeah, and the kids just got a kick out of being up there with camp, and they wanted to stay. There was an extra bunk or two in Miss Bethany's cabin.
Yeah,
and so they were trying to convince us to let them stay.
Maybe it's a good idea. Who knows?
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're also in a new studio. This is our second week. We're in the room behind the sanctuary here at church. Right. It's a little cold in here. It's a little chilly, but I think it's working out for us, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. The having the whole setup in your office, as cool as your office is, because it is very cool and vibey, I don't think it's ideal.
Well, it was hard to do anything else in there where you got all this equipment there. So this is great.
Yeah.
So we're trying this out. So we'll see how that goes. But I often say that Unhurried is like sitting down, having a cup of coffee together on a Sunday morning, or maybe you're out for a walk, or I say maybe you're driving, you're doing errands. But this week I actually heard about someone who listens in the most unusual. I didn't ever picture this when I picture people listening along. This Sunday, someone told me that he listens to the podcast on his way to work on his motorcycle.
Really?
So he's listening on his motorcycle. He's got the podcast going, and that creates a unique problem for him, which I've never thought about. Our podcasts are getting longer.
Yes, they are.
They're a little bit longer each, seems like week by week, mostly since you started coming, which is good. And since you started joining me, but he said, I'm glad they're getting longer now because it is the whole length of my trip to work now. I can listen the whole time. I can listen to it. And before, when he was listening, if it got done and he wasn't to work, it would just automatically go to the next random podcast.
Oh,
and on the motorcycle, he couldn't change it.
Right.
He didn't have a hand to change it, so he just had to listen to whatever randomly came up next. And so this way, he says, this is great because now you're the whole trip. I can listen to you guys.
Right. Yeah.
I thought that was great. I never pictured that, the way people listen.
Yeah, you're gonna have to tell me, not right now, but after, who drives a motorcycle, because that is pretty cool.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Oh
that
yeah,
is awesome.
I bet you wouldn't guess it either. But
Really?
I'm sure he's listening. So
Yeah.
kudos to you.
Yeah, that is so
for
cool.
listening to us and then listening to something random that you don't want to listen to, just to make sure you get us. So
Right, exactly.
anyway, we'll do our best to make this the length of your ride.
Yeah.
So well, I came across a really interesting quote recently, and I haven't told you this yet, so see how this sets with you. It seems like it makes sense. It says, someone said every Sunday a pastor preaches 3 sermons.
Okay.
The one that he planned, the one that he preached, and the one he wished he preached afterwards.
Right. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, and this podcast is sort of like dedicated to that 3rd sermon. Then.
Yes,
every week I plan a message, and then I give the message, and then we have a chance in the podcast to kind of pick it apart a little bit, or go a little deeper, think about it from a different angle, a different way.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that true for you for worship leading as well? Do you feel like you have what you plan, and then what actually happens, and then do you ever have that Monday morning where you're kind of, oh, I should have done this?
So, sometimes it comes to me, but for most of the time I try and plan or curate the worship set that follows, the theme of your message or the overarching theme of our, sermon series, So sometimes there'll be a song that'll come to me, during the week, or I'll hear and go, oh man, maybe that would have worked, better or something like that. But not so much, no. The only time I ever get worried is like when something goes wrong. then I wake up Monday morning going like, oh gosh, like that hurt.
Yeah, that hurt.
Yeah.
That hurt. I love it. Well, I feel like the way that this is morphing the podcast, and we're in our 2nd year doing this,
I know.
so it's crazy. But the way that it's sort of developing is not so much what I wish I would have said, but things I didn't have time to say.
Right.
These are things that I feel like so much goes into putting together the message, and there's a lot that just doesn't make it in because of our timing and because of the focus of the message itself. That there's lots of things I go, that's really a great concept or worth thinking about, but it doesn't really fit with the direction that the message is going.
Right.
And so we get a chance to kind of live with that a little bit here in the middle of the week as we follow up on it. Our current series is for this podcast. It's called Jesus Wants to Know, and we are looking at these questions that Jesus asked when he was on earth and seeing how they naturally connect to our lives today. There's still questions he would ask us, and it's kind of a really cool thing to think about. I don't know that a lot of times we look at the questions in Scripture that way, as if Jesus could still ask us those questions, but I think people are starting to get it. I'm talking to people after the messages, and they're like, "Oh, I think they're connecting now with seeing it through that lens."
Yeah.
This week, our story that we looked at from Jesus' life was a conversation with someone called an expert in the law, and it led to Jesus telling the famous parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan. But I don't know if that we often realize that parable was told in the context of a conversation. And so here's how kind of things unfolded. Jesus talks to this expert of the law who asks him a question about how do I inherit eternal life, and that led to a longer conversation and then led to him telling the parable itself. And the question that we landed on in Luke 10:36 was, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Or if we want to just translate that for us today, which was a neighbor? And what Jesus did is he changed the question that the man asked him. The man asked him, who's my neighbor? He was trying to limit who he had to love.
Right.
Like if we're supposed to love our neighbors, I need to kind of know who qualifies. Right. But Jesus changes the question. It's not, who is my neighbor, but who can I be a neighbor to?
Yeah.
And that's totally different. It's not who do I have to be a neighbor to, but who do I get to be a neighbor to? One is a question of restriction. I can just kind of really narrow down those who I need to love in life. And the other is a question of potential. Who could I be a neighbor to? And I wanted us to see that was Jesus's goal for us, is not to, feel like there's this very, small hurdle that we have to get over. to get eternal life if I can just love these handful of people that are, quite frankly, we would make them the people that are easy for us to love anyway. Right. We naturally would anyway, but rather to realize that this is the great challenge that Jesus gives all of us, is to live our lives being neighbors to everyone we meet, everyone we encounter.
Yeah. Well, it's so we're as humans, we're very, tribal. Everyone has their tribe or their family, or you know what I mean? Like, and so it's easy to be nice and loving to those people, but it's hard when you don't know someone, or they come from a different background, or they've maybe made some decisions in their life that you don't approve of. That's when it gets really difficult.
It's really difficult. Yeah. And sometimes those are people we know well. Sometimes there are people in our lives that we just have that friction with, and other times it's just people outside of our circle that they're not even on our radar.
Right.
Because we've just kind of naturally excluded them from those that we're gonna care about.
Right.
Yeah. And
So
as Jesus, like always, he just expands our definitions, and he just pushes us to the edge here. And again, I put a big emphasis on this on my message, and I want to say this here because I don't want anybody to be confused by this. We're not talking about what you have to do to get into heaven. That's how the story started, but Jesus quickly changed the discussion. This is now about what it means to be in the kingdom, not getting in, but being in.
Right.
Once getting in the kingdom is putting our faith in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are listening, if you're even unsure about that, simply inviting Christ into your life, accepting what he did for us. It's not anything we do for him; it's what he did for us. That's the doorway. That's how we get in. But we step inside and we realize this is an enormous room we've walked into, the kingdom of God, and there's so much to it. And Jesus then says, this is how you live in this kingdom. And those who live in his kingdom understand that being a neighbor is something that's way bigger than we ever imagined.
Yeah.
Loving our neighbor as ourselves.
Yeah. We're already on the team, right? Because Jesus is our Savior, and he's living in our hearts, and but now there's certain requirements in showing that love that Jesus gave so freely and so graciously to us, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and that's why I love thinking about it, not as a restriction, but as a potential.
Right.
It's not, or not as a requirement, maybe is a better.
Yes.
This isn't the requirement to get in. This is the potential we have once we are in.
Right.
To really love others the way Jesus did.
Right.
Which is in a radical way.
Right. Well, it reminds me of that when you were preaching yesterday. It reminds me of that the old song, like they will know we are Christians by our love, and now you listen to the song and you're like, okay, it's from the 70s, like it's it's very love,
kind of dated.
It's kind of dated, but the message is still so true. Like that really is every connection that we make with people that is really going to be how they're going to tell that we know that Jesus loves us, and we've accepted that, and we're sharing that in a very loving and peaceful way.
Yeah. Ryan's unique by being a young guy who knows old songs. That's I mean, new songs too, but you also know you're just you have a pretty wide range of the songs that you know.
I love music, and I love songs and songwriters. I'm not a great songwriter myself, but I appreciate the art, and I love listening to music. There really isn't a genre of music I don't like or can't pick an artist or two out of and say, I like these guys.
You just drop those in, because I'm not going to bring that to this discussion. So feel free to drop those song references anytime you want.
I've given you some vinyls. Your collection has gotten pretty vast.
Absolutely, some really good ones. Really good ones. Well, the way that Jesus got to the parable of the Good Samaritan, which teaches us about the radical nature of being a neighbor. The way he got there is interesting. The expert of law, we're told two things about him that kind of make the conversation suspect. One, we're told that he's trying to test Jesus, and secondly, later in the story, we're told he's trying to justify himself. So those two things tell us that this isn't really an honest question. It wasn't him genuinely wanting to know what it meant to inherit eternal life, to get into the kingdom. He sort of was testing Jesus and probably trying to make Jesus look bad in the conversation.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, he came to Jesus, said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus, just wisely and masterfully comes back with a question of his own. He says, "Well, what's written in the law? If you're an expert in the law, you tell me.
Yeah.
What's written in the law? How do you read it?"
Right.
And his answer was actually spot on. He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And that is a great answer. It's interesting though, because this story or this conversation could have gone in several directions. He could have asked him about what does it mean to love God in all those 4 different ways. That would have been a great discussion. It'd be really interesting. Jesus's answer to that. What does it mean to love God with my heart, my soul, my strength, my mind? Or he could have focused more on what it means to love others as myself. What do there's a lot of discussion around that, and we're going to get into it in a moment.
Yeah.
But instead, he focused really on who is my neighbor. That was the man's concern. Well, who exactly is my neighbor? Makes me think that he had a lot of discussion with some of his peers on that, and they had their kind of pat answer, and who was and who wasn't in their camp, and that he wanted to see what Jesus would say. And so that led to the famous parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus blew the categories off what it means to handpick our neighbors, and said, everyone you encounter, especially those in need, are now your neighbor.
In the group. Yeah.
Yeah. But here's what I want to talk about a little bit, Ryan. I'm kind of intrigued with the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. What does that mean, as yourself? The command comes from the Old Testament, from the law. Leviticus 19:18 is reaffirmed by Jesus in several places in the New Testament, and Paul also affirms that this is really a great summary of the law, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. But what does it mean to love others as ourselves, as you love yourself? What exactly does that mean? Well, first of all, Jesus assumes that we love ourselves. He's assuming that we have this natural, built-in self-protection mechanism that's God-given, that we look out for our own interests, that we care for ourselves, that we love ourselves. That's kind of a basic instinct that we all have, to look out for our own interests. And he's saying, I want you to look out for the interests of others in the same way. The Apostle Paul said something very similar in Philippians 2:4. He says that we should live our lives not looking out for our own interests, but each of you should look to the interest of others. And the idea is that in the same way we look to our own interests, we should care for the interests of others. So loving others as ourselves, first of all, just means that we treat them with the same priority.
Yeah.
That we care for ourselves, that we elevate their priority. Jesus assumes we're going to love ourselves. Now do the same thing for others as well. So first of all, I guess I want to say that Jesus assumes that we love ourselves. He assumes self-love. And when we think a little bit about that, loving others well requires us to have a healthy view of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
To see ourselves as those who are created in the image of God, loved by God. We understand our own value to God. We are in a better place to love other people well when we have a healthy understanding of ourselves. I've noticed this in my own life anyway, that when I have a healthy view of myself, when I'm having a day where I'm, kind of in a good place, it sets me free to not focus on myself, but to focus on other people.
Right.
It's only when I'm like consumed with myself in a negative way that it kind of I have blinders on to the needs of those around me. And so it's a healthy thing to see ourselves as valued by God, loved by God, be in a good place in our own psyche, our own understanding about who we are, because that actually sets us free to focus on other people.
Yeah. When we're feeling the love of Christ and we're our cup is full, right? It runneth over.
Yeah.
It's easy to fill someone else's cup, you know what I mean? And to fill them up and be able to, you know, be there for them, and share the love of Christ in that way, but when we're depleted, it's, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel and it's hard,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I love that the Bible, Old Testament, then Jesus reaffirms it, Paul reaffirms it, this idea that, a healthy view would be that we would be able to love others as we love ourselves, because it's assumed that we have we're in a good place with our own understanding of who we are, loved by God.
Right.
Then we can see others through the same lens of value and care that we naturally apply to ourselves. If we are down on ourselves, we're going to be down on other people too, probably.
Yeah.
And so that to me is really an interesting part of that
Sure.
that we didn't have a chance to go into, but I think it's worth thinking a little bit about.
Well, like people say, like hurt people, and
Right.
and it's like, if you're bitter, your guard's gonna be up. You're gonna be bitter towards people that, are different from you, or think differently from you, or and so, when we can start to break down those barriers and start to reaffirm ourselves in confidence and standing in Jesus's love, then we can be able to share that with other people too.
Yeah.
Our neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's a starting place, and then I'm also kind of intrigued that loving others as ourselves doesn't mean that we love them in the same way that we want to be loved.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't say love your neighbor in the same manner that you love yourself, but rather just simply as yourself.
Yeah.
In other words, with the same value, the same priority, the same care and intentionality.
Right.
So as yourself, to love others as yourself doesn't mean in the same way that we want to be loved.
Right.
But again, the same level of care and intention and focus. It's really the focus is on loving, not the word as. Sometimes we get hung up with as and go, well, I hear people say this a lot. What would you like to, and then just do for them what you would like to be. The golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. In the same way you want to be treated. Well, sometimes we take that to mean exactly the same thing.
Yes.
But we're all different people, right?
Right.
And so it's not really about how we want to be loved, but the priority with which we want to be, loved.
Right.
It's so natural for us to assume that other people want to be loved the same way we do, right? And then you discover people are so different,
right?
And their desire or the way that they would feel valued is so different than the way we would too.
Right. Well, you see that too, like in healthy marriages and things like that, or even healthy friendships. Like people will find things about the other person that they find value in or feel loved in, and then you do that with that person, you know what I mean? Or so it's like this different love languages and things like that. It's like you can have the best of, a relationship, but if you don't find each other's love languages, then you're not really showing that person love. You're showing them your version of love, and that's not always theirs. Yeah.
We can do that with our kids. We can do that
for sure.
with our spouses. We can do that with our friends, where we just assume what we would like is what they would like.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so to love as yourself doesn't mean in the same way.
No.
It means with the same value.
Yes.
The same, intentionality.
Yeah, that's so true.
I'm glad you brought up the love languages, because I wanted to think a little bit about that as well. Gary Chapman's famous book, The Love Languages, has helped us understand this in a way. I think it's made it more popular, brought it to a popular level where a lot of us now have that awareness that he argues that there's 5 different love languages. Who knows? Maybe there's 6 or 7. There may be dozens of them, but he's kind of categorized them into 5 areas. And he says they're the words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch. And those are the areas that he's kind of outlined as the love languages. My love language is words of affirmation.
Yeah.
That's for sure top of my list. It's easy for me to encourage other people and kind of affirm them, because that's that's what I like. And
Right.
so that's my go-to. And sometimes, if I'm not tuned into what the other person needs, I'm going to be giving them something that, who doesn't like that? But it may not be the most important thing in that situation.
Right.
For my wife, hers is quality time.
Yeah.
And so that's what I need to focus on with her. It'd be easy for me to just do the words of affirmation and forget that what she needs is the quality time with her. And so that's, where I've learned in our marriage, that's what she wants. So it's not as I would like it, but in the value. I'm going to value it the same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so true.
Others feel like it's acts of service is what they need. That's going to be the thing that makes them truly feel valued, is when you operate with you help them out with a task or with a project. You can imagine if you love surprises and then your friend doesn't, they don't like being the center of attention. They don't like being unprepared,
right?
And you throw them a surprise party, that's actually not loving them that well.
No.
Because that's not what they want, even if you loved surprises.
Yeah.
So the trick with loving others as ourselves is to find out the way that what resonates with them, what's going to help them feel valued and important.
Yeah.
And understand that, and not just what comes naturally to us, but what is going to be most meaningful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what, Jesus was talking about and wants us to know is that there's lots of different ways to love people, but to find the value in that person, and then also find what they value and love. Right. And then be able to then now be a part of that and be on that, their life with them in this way. You know what I mean? If, with friends or spouses or anything, it's like, if you find that quality time or acts of service and then you do that with them, it's like, they feel so valued in that, and even in our church, like there's different people that, serve on our teams that, accept love in different ways, and when you find that about that person, it feels really good for them, and for you too, because then you're able to now value them in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Chapman's list, they're all good things.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody's, going to bristle at any of those. They feel loving, but when you get in that sweet spot, and that's what I want. I want people to really understand, the way I would like to be loved is someone who takes the time to really understand, what's going to be the most meaningful for me. So when Jesus says that we do that for others, it really is that taking the time to really understand that and then do it.
Right. And then do it and act on it.
Then act upon it.
Yeah.
Right. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9:22, he said, I have become all things to all people, that by all possible means I might save some. And there is this side of the believer's life that is meant to really understand that people are different and that we have to adjust on our end. It's us adjusting for their sake. Mm-hmm. That's what love is. Love isn't just assuming everybody comes into my life on my terms. I think that's what the expert of the law was hoping for. He's hoping Jesus to say, yeah, anybody who's kind of like you and understands things the way you do and you get along with, that's your neighbor. Mm-hmm. It's adjusting, being willing to adjust to those around us for the sake of love.
Yes.
And to make that your priority.
Right.
I kind of feel like Jesus did that in this with the parable, because he's talking to the expert of the law, and the first example was a priest. And in the message, I point out the priest was actually, in a total different theological camp than the expert of the law. The expert of the law was a Pharisee. The priest was a Sadducee. He was not like him. And so Jesus is now expanding the categories for neighbors, someone who's different than you. He's a priest. The Levite was a second individual in the parable. Same thing. Yeah. Not like the expert. And I kind of had some fun with that in the message where I talked about the smug smile that must have come on the face of the expert of law when the priest and the Levite look bad in the story, in the parable. They don't love this guy that was half dead on the side of the road. as a neighbor as they should have. And I think the expert of the law might have felt like, oh, good, these guys are not like me, and they're looking bad, thinking that the person that was going to end up being the hero of the story and the definition of what it means to be a neighbor would be a lot like him. But then Jesus has this twist at the end, and the third individual, the Samaritan, is definitely not like him.
Right.
So instead of going closer to him, he's going further and further away. He's really broadening the circle of those who could be considered his neighbor. And Jesus isn't done yet with the twist, because already this is like, wow, you're really, expanding the category, the circle that I need to draw around those who could be considered neighbors in my life. But then the categories are completely demolished at the end, because Jesus says it's not about who is your neighbor. It's about who needs you to be their neighbor.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was this guy on the side of the road who had been, mugged, who had been beat up and left there on the side of the road to die. And that's who he could be a neighbor to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not about limiting the circle, but really expanding the circle.
Yeah.
And then doing what that guy needs. I'm thinking about it like if you're like me and your love language is words of affirmation, it wouldn't have been that helpful to go up to him and just compliment the guy. Hey, you're looking good today. I like the way you wear your hair. That's those sandals. Where'd you get those? Those are
get back in there, champ.
Yeah, you're doing great. Hang in there. It's like he didn't need compliments. He needed bandages.
Right. Yeah, he needed help.
He needed help. Acts of service right then is what he needed.
Right.
And just jump in there, and that's exactly what the Good Samaritan in the story did.
Right.
He did what the guy needed.
Yes.
And so we from the parable, what we've been talking about really connects.
Yes.
Really,
yes, it does. Yeah. Well, he found the person where they were, and was able to come alongside them, to help them, to serve them, I think is the main point there.
Yeah.
To be there for them, and to make sure that they get back on the right track.
Yeah.
We oftentimes project what we want when we should almost flip it around and say, we need to find people where they are, find out what they need, and get them back on track,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that guy, he needed acts of service. So that's what you need to, just, step into that role and do what they need in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key for us is taking time to really understand what the people that those that God's brought into our lives, brought into our pathway, taking time to understand what they need, what they want, how they would feel valued. And you say, well, that's hard. I mean, Jesus was good at that. He knew what was in the heart of humanity. Every person he came up to, he seemed to treat them differently based on what they uniquely needed. You say, that's easy for Jesus. How do we do that? Well, one of the ways we do it is ask him.
Mm-hmm.
We can just ask what would mean the most to you. I mean, doesn't that, if someone asks you, doesn't that make you feel valued?
For sure.
What can I do for you?
Yeah.
What would be most helpful right now?
Yeah.
Or how can I serve you or help you or encourage you today that's going to make a difference?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is that we all want to feel seen. We all want to feel valued. We all want to feel like we're a priority to others and cared for. And in the same way that God's designed us to be that way, we now learn to do that with others as well. The name of this podcast, and one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize in the message, is the idea that neighbor is a verb.
Yeah.
For the believer, neighbor is a verb. Now, I get it. It's a noun. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's technically a noun. I'm a word guy. I get that.
Yeah, Pastor Doug said it. It's a verb now.
But for Jesus and his people, I think he wants us to see it as also a verb, as something that we do.
Mm-hmm.
If we limit it to just a noun, then it's like, well, who's the neighbor in my life? A noun, but who can I neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
That becomes now an action point. Who can I be a neighbor to?
Yeah.
And I think to me that's a whole different way to look at it, and a liberating way to think about it. It's a challenging way to think about it. But to me, it's what I want to do better this week.
Yeah.
I want to do it better in this year.
Yeah.
I want to do a better job of thinking that way about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it I don't know. When you're talking about it, even yesterday too, there were some people that came to mind in my own life, and I was like, I could probably, no, actually not probably, I could be doing a better job.
Yeah.
And it's real easy to put up the walls and to not let people in, and it's really hard to go outside of yourself and be that neighbor for someone, so yeah, I don't know. Listening to it yesterday and now kind of getting into the discussion a little bit. There's some people in my life that I'm like, okay, I need to be better at this.
Maybe that's happening for our listeners and viewers as well. That there are people coming to mind for them, and I hope that's the case. Hopefully that's a prompting of the Spirit who's bringing faces, to our minds as individuals that He's placed in our pathway. And again, to me, it's so helpful, and I think encouraging and liberating to think of this not, well, I have to do this to get into heaven. Rather, this is something that's characteristic of those who are on their way.
Right.
That as those who have been brought into God's kingdom, and quite frankly, we were that half-dead guy on the side of the road, and Jesus found us there, and He bandaged us and put us back together, and paid for our lodging, and did all the things that the Good Samaritan did. Symbolically, Jesus did all those things for us, and paying for our restoration in a way that we could never repay. And because He's done that for us, because He's been the ultimate capital good neighbor for us, we now, in response, need to grow in those areas, want to grow in those areas, are invited to grow in those areas that we might, represent the one who is a good neighbor for us.
Right.
Yeah. And why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we when we really take the time to think about what Jesus did for us?
Right. Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
Like you said, like, I don't know what that, like, feeling, not convicted, but in the sense of like, saying like, okay, I think I need Jesus to step in in this. And we talked about it, I think, a few weeks ago about like the self-righteous, part, and how you can start to get to that point where you go like, well, I check all the boxes, what I mean? I go to church, the kids are in church and all, so it's like you check all, and then you kind of get to the point where you kind of go like, well, I'm so great. You know what I mean? Like, how come I have to kind of, be so nice to everyone or be loving to everyone, like I'm doing great, And so I don't know, at least in the series that we're in right now, I feel like every week you're building on the fact of like Jesus wants us to know these certain things, you know what I mean? And you even said it yesterday too, where you said like heaven bound people, and I thought that was really cool that you're like, okay, we got the Jesus part. We've accepted Jesus. We know where we're going.
Yes.
Right. Now it's the time to show people along the way of where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that we overlook things in their lives, or it's just that even though Jesus was quite direct and harsh with some people, but it was always from a place of love.
Yes.
And so as we love others, we will also challenge them. We will also, but it will be done not with an attitude of anger or, I'll show them,
right?
But rather from a position of love. And if some of the people that are coming to our minds right now, as those who are grappling with this, listening to this, riding their motorcycle somewhere and thinking about this, if some of those people are really, you're saying, I don't think I can do it. I just don't know how I would have the capacity to do it. I think Jesus says to us, you can't, but let me do it through you.
Yeah.
Let me do it through you.
Yeah.
So we have to remember, with all these things, we have His Spirit given to us to enable us to do what is otherwise hard difficult, impossible sometimes for us to do on our own.
Yeah, very much so. Yep.
Well, thank you for those who are following along, either listening or viewing every week. And thank you, Ryan, for your engaging conversation. I love it. If you'd like to listen to this again, this has been a deeper dive into a sermon that I gave from Luke 10 called Neighbor is a Verb. And you can catch that at greenvalleychurch.com. Also, I don't know, you probably don't have time to look this up, but can you look up the old podcasts that we've, the list of the titles?
Sure.
I did a podcast last year. If you can look at the list while I'm talking about this, there was something that was, it was called something like "Is Love Enough?" It was during the Galatians series on recovering from religion, and there was a podcast that I did called "Is Love Enough?" or "How is I don't know if
we have 60 something episodes now that we have to sift through.
Yeah, I don't know if we can get it, but there's something in the previous podcast called from last year. If you want to go into a deeper discussion of this that we talked about, is love really enough? I mean, is Paul in that case being too optimistic to think that Christian love really is as powerful as it is. And in that, we talked about how robust love is.
Right. What I'll do is I'll find it, and I can link it to this podcast also. So if everyone wants to go back, they can listen to it.
So you'll see it in the comments or the notes with the podcast.
Yep.
You follow along.
Cool.
And see, that would be extra credit for those that want to, they need something for their ride home on the motorcycle.
Right, exactly.
Then you can listen to that.
And after this, I just want a motorcycle. Honey, I bought a motorcycle.
Yeah. Guess what? We talked about it, and now I've got one. Love it. Well, until next time, this has been Unhurried with me, your host, Doug Kyle, our producer, Ryan Viramontes. I look forward to talking soon.